Have you ever looked at your life and quietly wondered how you ended up so far from the person you thought you would become? Not because you stopped caring, not because you stopped dreaming, but because somewhere along the way you got tired, distracted, hurt, and little by little the life you wanted started slipping through your fingers. Maybe nobody knows how heavy that feels. Maybe you smile when people are watching and carry the disappointment when nobody is around. Maybe you've become so used to surviving that you've forgotten what it feels like to truly believe in yourself. And maybe the hardest part is not the mistakes, it's the fear. The fear that you missed your chance. The fear that everyone else figured life out while you're still trying to put the pieces together. The fear that this is simply who you are now. But what if that fear is lying to you? What if the version of you that you're mourning was never lost? What if it's still there, buried under years of stress, regret, and broken promises? Because the truth is, people rarely destroy their lives overnight. They abandon themselves slowly. One excuse at a time, one disappointment at a time, one promise broken after another. Until one day they wake up and no longer recognize the person staring back at them. And that's where many people make a terrible mistake. They think rebuilding means starting from zero. They think having to begin again means they failed. But starting over is not proof that you lost. It is proof that you refuse to stay broken. There is courage in deciding to try again. There is strength in getting up when nobody expects you to. And there is something powerful about a person who has been through disappointment and still chooses hope. Because hope is not weakness. Hope is rebellion. Hope is looking at everything that went wrong and saying, my story is not finished. You don't need a perfect past. You don't need perfect timing. You don't need everyone to believe in you. You only need one thing, the willingness to stop running from yourself. That is where everything changes. Not when life becomes easier, not when circumstances become perfect, but when you decide that you are worth fighting for. Because deep down, you already know something has to change. You felt it, late at night, in quiet moments, in those seconds when nobody is demanding anything from you and the truth finally speaks. You know you're capable of more, not because you need to become somebody else, but because you've spent too long settling for less than what your soul knows is possible. And maybe you've tried before. Maybe you made promises you couldn't keep. Maybe you started and stopped so many times that you no longer trust yourself. That pain is real. But your past failures are not a life sentence. They are evidence that you haven't stopped searching, and people who are still searching have not been defeated. They are unfinished. There is a difference. So don't judge yourself by the chapters where you were exhausted. Don't define yourself by seasons that were never meant to last forever. Storms pass. Pain changes. People rebuild. And so can you. Not because you're special. Not because life will suddenly become fair. But because human beings are stronger than they realize. And because the moment a person stops believing that they are beyond saving, something extraordinary begins. Something quiet, something powerful, something capable of changing an entire future. Stay with this, because by the time this journey is over, I want you to see yourself differently. Not through the eyes of regret, not through the voice of fear, but through the truth. And the truth is simple. You are not too late, you are not finished, and your life does not have to end where it almost fell apart, because the truth alone is not enough. Knowing that your life can change means nothing if you keep using the same patterns that brought you here. And this is where so many people become trapped. They wait. They wait for motivation. They wait for confidence. They wait for the perfect moment. They wait until they feel ready. And while they wait, life keeps moving. Days become months. Months become years. And dreams that once felt alive slowly become memories. Not because they lacked talent, not because they lacked intelligence, but because they built their future on feelings, and feelings are unstable. Some mornings you'll feel unstoppable. Other mornings you'll feel nothing at all. If your actions depend on emotions, your future will rise and fall with them. That is a dangerous way to live, because motivation makes promises it cannot keep. It visits when things are exciting, then disappears when things become difficult, and difficulty always comes. That's why so many people live inside an endless cycle, inspired one day, discouraged the next, starting over every Monday, making promises every January, watching the same year repeat itself, under a different date. And the worst part is not losing time. The worst part is what repeated disappointment does to your identity. It slowly convinces you that maybe you're the problem, maybe you're lazy, maybe you're weak, maybe discipline belongs to other people. And after enough failures, you stop trusting yourself. Not because you hate yourself, but because you've been disappointed too many times. You stop dreaming as big. You lower your expectations. You settle, not because that's what you wanted, but because disappointment taught you to expect less. And that quiet surrender is far more dangerous than failure. Failure hurts, but surrender steals your future. That's why something has to change. Not your goals, not your dreams, not your potential. Your approach. Because transformation was never meant to depend on temporary emotions. It was meant to depend on something stronger, something quieter, something that remains even when motivation disappears. Your standards, your systems, your daily choices. The life you want is not built in dramatic moments. It is built in ordinary ones. It is built when nobody is watching, when excuses are available, when comfort is calling your name, when quitting would be easy. Those moments matter more than you realize, because every action sends a message to your mind. Every promise kept says, I can trust myself. Every promise broken says, maybe I can't. And eventually, those messages become beliefs. Those beliefs become identity. And identity shapes destiny. That is why rebuilding your life is not about forcing yourself to become a different person overnight. It is about proving to yourself, one choice at a time, that you are capable of becoming the person you already admire. Not through giant changes, but through small victories repeated long enough. Because confidence is not something you find, it is something you earn. Self-respect is not given, it is built. And trust in yourself returns the same way it was lost. Slowly, quietly, repeatedly. You don't need to win every battle. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need to feel inspired every day. You simply need to stop abandoning yourself. Because every time you show up when you don't feel like it, something invisible happens. You become stronger. Not physically, not emotionally, but internally. And internal strength changes everything. It changes the way you speak, the way you carry yourself, the way you respond to pain, the way you face uncertainty. People think transformation is loud, but the most powerful changes are silent. They happen in private, long before the world notices, long before success arrives, long before anyone applauds. And that is why most people quit, because they want visible results before invisible growth is finished doing its work. But those who stay, those who keep showing up, those who refuse to disappear when progress feels slow, they experience something most people never do. They stop waiting to become confident, and they begin becoming dangerous. Because a person who learns to act without depending on motivation can no longer be controlled by temporary emotions. And once that happens, everything begins to change. Because everything begins to change the moment you stop asking, how do I reach my goals? And start asking, who do I need to become? That question changes everything. Because goals can be achieved and forgotten, but identity follows you everywhere. And whether you realize it or not, Your identity is making decisions long before your emotions do. A person who sees themselves as unreliable will find reasons to quit. A person who sees themselves as disciplined will find reasons to continue. The difference is not talent. The difference is the story they believe about themselves. And stories are powerful, because human beings will fight to protect the identity they carry, even when that identity is hurting them. That is why some people sabotage opportunities. That is why some people settle for less. That is why some people stay stuck in patterns they hate. Because deep inside, they have accepted a version of themselves that no longer deserves to stay. And maybe you've been carrying labels that were never yours. Maybe failure became your identity. Maybe disappointment became your identity. Maybe the opinions of people who never understood your struggles became your identity. Maybe one painful chapter convinced you that this is all you'll ever be. But a chapter is not a destiny. One bad season does not define an entire life. And you don't rebuild your future by constantly looking backward. You rebuild it by deciding that the old story ends here, not tomorrow, not someday, here. Because every great transformation begins with permission. Permission to believe that you are allowed to become more. Permission to outgrow your past. Permission to stop punishing yourself for mistakes that already happened. You have spent enough time carrying guilt, enough time replaying regrets, enough time convincing yourself that because things went wrong before, they will always go wrong. That belief has stolen enough from you. It has taken your energy, your confidence, your peace, and perhaps worst of all, it has taken your trust in yourself. But trust can return, not through words, through proof, through tiny promises that are so small you cannot hide from them. Not because small actions are insignificant, because small actions are powerful. People underestimate them because they are not dramatic. But life is not changed by dramatic moments. Life is changed by repeated moments. A single choice seems meaningless until it becomes a habit. A habit seems harmless until it becomes character, and character eventually becomes destiny. That's why the smallest victory matters. Getting out of bed when your mind says stay down matters. Keeping your word when nobody would know if you broke it matters. Showing up when excuses are available matters. Because every time you do, you are casting a vote for the person you are becoming. And those votes add up, slowly, quietly, powerfully, until one day you look at yourself and realize something incredible. You are no longer fighting to become that person. You are that person. Not because life became easier, not because fear disappeared, but because consistency changed you. And there is something extraordinary about a person who learns to trust themselves again. Because once trust returns, confidence follows. Once confidence follows, momentum appears. And momentum is powerful. Momentum turns effort into progress. Progress turns hope into belief. Belief turns ordinary people into forces that obstacles cannot easily stop. This is why you cannot afford to keep speaking to yourself like the person you used to be. That version of you survived. Respect that. But survival is no longer enough. You were not created just to repeat the same pain. You were not given another year just to relive old disappointments. There is more waiting for you. More growth, more strength, more peace, more purpose. But none of it belongs to the version of you that keeps looking for permission to stay small. The world does not change when you finally feel fearless. It changes when you decide that fear no longer gets the final word. And the moment that decision becomes real, something begins to awaken inside you. Something stronger than motivation, deeper than emotion. Something that has the power to rebuild an entire life from the ground up. Something that has the power to rebuild an entire life from the ground up. And once that power begins to wake up inside you, something remarkable happens. You stop chasing perfection. You start chasing progress. And that changes everything. Because perfection is exhausting. It demands flawless performance. It punishes mistakes. It convinces you that one bad day means you failed. And that lie has destroyed more dreams than failure ever could. People quit because they expect transformation to look dramatic. They expect instant results, instant confidence, instant success. But real change rarely announces itself. It grows in silence. It grows through repetition. It grows through moments so small that most people overlook them. And that is exactly why most people never experience their full potential. They are searching for giant breakthroughs while ignoring the tiny victories that create them. Are not small. They are evidence. Evidence that you are changing. Evidence that you are becoming stronger. Evidence that your future does not have to resemble your past. Because confidence does not come from thinking positive thoughts. Confidence comes from collecting proof. Proof that you can keep your word. Proof that you can endure discomfort. Proof that you can continue even when emotions try to convince you otherwise. And every time you do something difficult, you send a message to your mind. You say, I am not who I used to be. That message matters. Because eventually your mind begins to believe it. And once your mind believes it, your standards begin to rise. You stop accepting what once felt normal. You stop making excuses that once felt reasonable. You stop negotiating with habits that are destroying your future. Because growth changes your standards. And standards determine the direction of your life. The reason some people achieve extraordinary things is not because they are extraordinary. It is because they stopped lowering the standard they expect from themselves. Not out of punishment, out of self-respect. And self-respect changes everything. It changes the way you spend your time. It changes what you tolerate. It changes who you surround yourself with. It changes the conversations you have with yourself when nobody else is listening. Because your life will always move toward the standards you accept, not the dreams you talk about, not the goals you write down, the standards you live by. Matters more than you think, not because one decision changes your life, but because one decision changes the person making the next decision. And that is how momentum is born, not in one grand moment, but through repeated acts of courage, repeated acts of discipline, repeated acts of self-respect, until something incredible begins to happen. The things that once felt impossible start feeling normal. The habits that once felt painful start feeling natural. The version of yourself you once admired from a distance starts looking back at you in the mirror. And that feeling cannot be bought. It cannot be given. It must be earned, which is why it is so valuable. Because there is nothing more powerful than a person who has learned to trust themselves again. Nothing more dangerous than someone who no longer needs constant motivation. Nothing more unstoppable than someone who has built confidence through action instead of wishes. But don't mistake progress for the end of the battle. Because the moment you begin rising, resistance will appear. Not because you're failing, because you're changing. Old habits will resist, old fears will return, doubt will whisper, comfort will invite you back, and there will be days when the easier path will look tempting, days when quitting will seem reasonable, days when the old version of you will beg for control. And those days will reveal something important, not how talented you are, not how intelligent you are, but how badly you want the life you claim to desire. Because eventually, every dream reaches a place where excitement disappears. And when that moment arrives, character takes over. That is where lives are rebuilt. That is where futures are decided. And that is where most people walk away. Not because they are incapable, but because they misunderstand the meaning of pain. Not because they misunderstand the meaning of pain. They believe pain is proof that something is wrong. They believe struggle means they are failing. They believe difficult seasons are signs that they should stop. And because of that belief, they walk away right before the transformation they prayed for begins to take shape. But growth has never been comfortable. Strength has never been built in comfort, and the life you want will demand something from you. Not perfection, not superhuman discipline, but endurance. Because there will be days when nothing makes sense. Days when progress feels invisible. Days when your effort seems unanswered. Days when doubt speaks louder than hope. And on those days, your emotions will try to convince you that none of this is worth it. They will remind you of every mistake, every disappointment, every reason to quit. They will tell you to go back to comfort, back to familiar habits, back to the life that never fulfilled you, but at least felt predictable. That is the trap, because familiar pain often feels safer than unfamiliar growth. People stay stuck not because they love suffering, they stay because uncertainty scares them more than disappointment. The life that exhausted you, the habits that made you unhappy, the excuses that stole years from you, those things are asking for another chance. Not because they care about you, but because they fear losing control over you. And every day you refuse to surrender, you weaken their grip. Every day you keep moving forward, even slowly, you prove that your future matters more than your comfort. That is not weakness, that is courage, because courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing not to obey fear. And fear will speak. It always does. It will tell you that you're too late, too broken, too old, too far behind. It will compare your journey to everybody else's. It will make you feel like you're running out of time. But fear has been wrong before, and it is wrong now, because some of the greatest transformations happen after years of struggle. Some of the strongest people were once convinced they would never recover. Some of the brightest futures were born in the darkest seasons. Suffering is magical. But because hardship reveals what comfort hides, it reveals character. It reveals values. It reveals how much a person is willing to fight for the life they say they want. And eventually, life asks everyone the same question. Not whether you have talent, not whether you have potential, but whether you are willing to continue when the excitement disappears. Because excitement is temporary, character remains. And character is built when nobody is cheering, when nobody notices, when nobody understands, when results are taking longer than expected. Those moments matter. Those moments count. Those moments shape destinies. Because there is something extraordinary about a person who refuses to quit on themselves, a person who gets knocked down and rises again, a person who cries and still keeps going, a person who doubts and still chooses faith. That kind of person becomes difficult to stop, not because life stops testing them, but because they stop allowing hardship to define them. You will look back at this season, not with bitterness, not with regret, but with gratitude, because you will realize that the struggle you wanted to escape was preparing you for the life you wanted to reach. The pressure was not destroying you, it was revealing you. It was removing what no longer belonged. It was teaching you patience, teaching you discipline, teaching you resilience, teaching you how to become someone who could handle the blessings they once prayed for. Because receiving more means becoming more, and becoming more requires letting go of the person who keeps running from discomfort. That version cannot come with you, not where you're going, because the future you dream about demands a stronger mindset, a stronger heart, a stronger identity, and whether you realize it or not, you are being shaped right now, not by what is easy, but by what is difficult, not by what feels good, but by what demands growth. And if you keep showing up, even imperfectly, a day will come when you barely recognize the person who once thought about giving up. And a day will come when you barely recognize the person who once thought about giving up. Not because life suddenly became perfect, not because every problem disappeared, but because you changed. Because somewhere in the middle of the struggle, while nobody was watching, you became stronger. And that is what makes this year different. Not the date on the calendar, not the excitement of a fresh beginning, but the decision you make every morning when nobody is there to remind you. Because years do not change lives, Choices do. And the truth is, time will pass no matter what. The weeks will move. The seasons will change. Another year will arrive. And the question that matters is not whether time is moving. The question is whether you are. Because 1 year from now, you will meet someone. You will meet the person your daily choices created. That person will either carry the same regrets, the same excuses, the same frustrations, or they will carry something different. Strength, peace, confidence, self-respect. And the distance between those two futures is built by what you choose today. Not someday, today. Because life is not decided in giant moments. Life is decided in ordinary moments repeated over and over again. It is decided when you are tired, when you are disappointed, when nobody is applauding, when nobody believes in you yet. Those moments are writing your story, and stories have consequences. Because every decision compounds, every excuse compounds, every act of discipline compounds, every moment of courage compounds. Nothing stays small forever. That is why you cannot keep treating your days as if they don't matter. They matter more than you know, because the future is hidden inside the things you do repeatedly. And if you continue giving your attention to distractions, your energy to fear, and your time to habits that lead nowhere, eventually those choices will collect a price. Not immediately, but eventually. And the pain of regret is heavy. Heavy because it whispers a terrible sentence. You could have become more. You could have tried. You could have fought. You could have answered the calling inside you. But regret is not your destiny. Not if you decide that this is the moment you stop making peace with less. Because deep inside, you know. You know there is more in you. More discipline, more wisdom, more courage, more purpose. You have felt it. Even in your darkest moments, even when doubt was loud, even when life knocked you down. Something inside you refused to die. Something inside you kept hoping, kept searching, kept believing that your story was not over. Protect that part of yourself. Fight for it. Because not everyone listens to that voice. Some people spend their entire lives ignoring it. And years later, they wonder where their passion went, where their joy went, where they went. Do not let that happen to you. You have come too far to return to the life that almost broke you. You have survived too much to settle for surviving. You were not given another day, just to repeat old patterns. You were given another day to build something better, something real, something meaningful. And yes, there will be difficult days ahead. There will be moments when progress feels slow, moments when fear returns, moments when doubt knocks on the door. Let it knock, but do not let it live inside you. Because fear does not decide who you become. Your choices do, your habits do, your standards do, your actions do. And if you keep choosing growth over comfort, discipline over excuses, and purpose over distraction, there will come a moment when you realize something beautiful. The life you once dreamed about is no longer a dream. It is your reality. Not because luck finally found you, not because the world became easier, but because you refused to give up on the person you were capable of becoming. And when you stand at the end of this chapter, looking back at everything you overcame, you will understand something that changes everything. Rebuilding your life was never about getting your old life back. It was about becoming someone greater than you ever imagined possible.